Giants and Why We Need Them. This is by Patrick N. Dunn, Professor of Geography, Sustainability Research Center, University of the Sunshine Coast on the conversation. Think of any sizable water gap. It may be that between you and the island many kilometers off the coast, a place like Kangaroo Island, South Australia, or Sri Lanka as viewed from nearby India. It might be the gap between Wales and Ireland, or that separating France from England. Were I to tell you that someone once walked across that gap, you might look askance at me, maybe fear for my sanity. But if I insisted, the only way you might rationalize this, or I told you, would be to consider that someone in question had been a giant. Now we have a lot of giants especially in Greek mythology. For example, the Argonauts and Ulysses, when he ended up at the land of the cyclops, they were like mountains. These cyclops were the ones that had the one eye in the middle of their forehead. And the adventures of Ulysses there. So, now, we also have, of course, giants in the Holy Bible, especially the Old Testament. The Nephilim of Genesis, the book of Genesis. And we even have the young David fighting with Goliath the giant. Now, the Philistines also of Crete, the ancient island of Crete, were said to be giants. Now, people did once walk across all these gaps, but at a time when the sea level was lower, and these gaps were mostly dry land. During the last great ice age, sea level in most parts of the world lay around 120 meters below today. That's about 350, 400 feet. So you can imagine 400 feet lower sea levels worldwide means that a lot of land had been walkable. Now, land masses were larger as a consequence, and many that are separated today were, of course, joined together. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. As sea level rose at the end of the last ice age, crossing these gaps became increasingly difficult. The routes taken would have been more courteous, perhaps possibly only through a combination of wading and walking. As sea level continued rising, the gaps eventually became impassable for people on foot, and perhaps eventually too lengthy to readily cross with watercraft. But the memories of when things were otherwise lingering on in the stories of peoples on either side of the water gap. Given that these memories were first shaped around 6,000 years ago, in most parts of the world, the stories were told only orally. At first, no one would have questioned the authenticity of these stories. There were many people to corroborate their veracity, yet as time wore on, listeners would inevitably have grown more and more skeptical. So at some point, storytellers decided that to overcome such skepticism, the people who once crossed these gaps would posthumously become long-limbed giants. In many societies, giants became part of received wisdom. From the coast of Wales west to that of Ireland, it's now at least 73 kilometers and at least 50 meters deep, a distance that would have become impassable on foot at least 9,600 years ago. Yet Welsh stories speak of Bran the Blessed, Ben Dingain Fran, once walked across this gap to rescue his distressed sister from her abusive husband. How might anyone who did not know about sea level change be expected to credit such a story, important to Welsh culture identity, unless Bran had been a giant? So is the story of Bran a distant memory of something that happened more than 9,600 years ago? Perhaps. Well, my comment here is perhaps we had giants 9,600 years ago. Let's remember, we have to keep in mind the tremendous number of earth changes and extinction level events, various types of hominins and human types of species, that went extinct either by the Younger Dryas Clovis comet impact or perhaps a supervolcanic eruption like the one that happened 27,500 years ago in the Taupo supervolcano of the North Island of New Zealand. Now, in South Australia, there once lived a family of giants who made their home in a succession of volcanic craters. They cooked their food in these craters, which have become known as the ovens of Cratebol, after one of the giants. Had the craters been smaller, then the family may not have needed to have been giants in order to make the story credible. The Pacific Islands are the legendary homes of many giants. In some stories, Maui, the great fisher of islands, was a giant, but another altogether less benign was Uoki, who traveled around uprooting whole islands with his giant crowbar. He went along the coast, prizing huge chunks off Easter Island like a memory of island flank landslips, while his crowbar broke on the hard rocks at Puko Puhi Puhi. People reached Easter Island around a millennium ago, so the story, which likely came with them from other islands, has survived at least this long. There are imagined giants world like Swift's Broddingan Nag and those from the mind of Roald Dahl, but these were never intended to be believable literally. Yet in pre-literate times, some were. Giants shaped the earth, they made people, giants drank the oceans, they fought in the skies and within the earth, shaking it or causing blood-red rock to spill out from its interior, in other words, a type of magma, lava. The halitotic breath of Enceladus, a giant buried within Mount Etna in Italy, escapes as vapors while its periodic shakings were once taken as him turning to relieve the pressure of the wound inflicted by Athena when she buried him beneath Sicily. Such stories were originally intended to be taken literally to rationalize landscape changes, especially catastrophic ones, to seed human memory, and to inform appropriate responses. We read today stories about giants in myriad contexts, world creating and world destroying, good and evil, clumsy and careful, but we have rarely paused to consider why and when people first needed to invent them. Okay, well, this professor here, Patrick Nunn, professor of geography and research center, University of the Sunshine Coast, doesn't make any reference to the actual giants that were, of course, among us in antiquity. This is just a hypothetical reason for creating them because of the fact that they couldn't understand geological changes. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. This is On the Conversation, Creative Commons. Thank you.